Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to lesson 24. In this lesson, we're going to cover verbs that begin with the letter ya or with the letter waw. So, as a review, most verbs in Arabic are triliteral. What that means is that they have three root letters. So, for example, the verb kataba has the root letters kaf, ta, and ba. And so, all other verbs that are derived from kataba have these three root letters. So for example, katabat, she wrote, has kaf ta ba followed by the ta suffix. Yaktubu, which means he writes, has kataba preceded by the ya prefix. So this is the case for all regular verbs. Regular verbs, you have the three root letters and they always all show up in all of the different derived forms. Now, we said that regular verbs don't have ya, hamza, or waw as one of their root letters. So today what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at irregular verbs, and specifically those ones that start with a waw or a ya. Now in Arabic, waw and ya are called weak letters. And the reason they're called weak letters is because when you go start deriving other verbs from verbs that have waw and ya, the waw and ya can change or they can drop off, they can be removed. And so they're considered weak because they don't always show up to all of the different forms. So let's take an example here. Let's take the verb wajada. So wajada means he found. Okay? So now that's the third person masculine singular. What if I want to say those two men found? They found. Then I say wajada with an alif at the end. Or if it's more than two people, wajadu. So I can complete this whole table here. Wajadat, wajadata, wajadna, wajadta, wajadtuma, wajadtum, wajadti, wajadtuma, wajadtunna, wajadtu, wajadna. Alright, so you see that this is the past tense table, and it should be very familiar to you from the past tense table that you've memorized for regular verbs. Think about something like kataba. It has pretty much exactly the same table. Kataba, kataba, katabu. And so what's different about these irregular verbs that start with wa? It turns out that they're not different in the past tense, but they're actually different in the present tense. In the present tense, you'll notice that if I want to say he finds, so wajada is he found, yajidu is he finds. Okay? So notice how it's different here. So if we went from wajada to yajidu. Now if this was a regular verb, we would go from kataba to yaktubu, or daraba to yadribu. Now in this case, we have yajidu instead of yawjidu. Okay, so what has happened is that the waw has dropped. And this is what always happens. If you have a verb that starts with wa and you're in the present tense, that waw will drop. So we have yajidu, yajidani, yajiduna, tajidu, tajidani, yajidna, tajidu, tajidani, tajiduna, tajidina, tajidani, tajidna, ajidu, najidu. You'll notice in all of these cases, the waw has dropped. So we'll go through this table and repeat it until you can recognize each of these different forms. If you see something like ajidu, you should realize that that is the first person singular form. That means I find. Okay, the other thing I should mention is that nouns that are derived from verbs, specifically from these verbs that have a waw or a ya at the beginning, they might have a ya or they might have an alif in place of that waw. Okay, so if you take this verb here, wathaqa, you'll notice that the three root letters are waw, tha, qaf. But the noun that's derived from it, mithaqun, which means an oath, doesn't have a waw. The waw has transformed into a ya. And this can happen, it's quite common. Okay. Now let me show you some examples. We're not really focusing on vocabulary in this course, but I want you to understand exactly how the past tense and the present tense are related, and sometimes the easiest way is just to go through a few examples. So we have the past tense here, waritha, which means he inherited. Yarithu, he inherits. And we can also look at the verbal noun, which is the act of inheriting. It's irthun. Notice how the waw dropped in the present tense, and it changed to an alif in the verbal noun, irthun. Let's do one more example, maybe wasala, which means he arrived. Yasilu, he arrives. and wusulun, the act of arrival. Notice that in this case, the verbal noun still maintains the waw. That did not change. But the present tense, the waw dropped, as always. Okay? We also said that we would look at verbs that begin with ya. Now, it turns out that in the Quran, these verbs are a lot rarer, so we're not going to go through the full set of rules. But I will give you just one example of a verb that appears quite often in the Quran, and that is the verb ayqana, which means to be certain. Okay, to be certain. So ayqana is the past tense. It means he was certain. And this is actually a form 4 verb. If you don't remember what a form 4 verb is, you can go back to lesson 16 where we looked at all of the different derived verb forms. So this is a verb like aslama, for example, just like salima becomes aslama, yaqana becomes ayqana. So it means he was certain. Now in the present tense, this ya actually changes to a waw. So instead of it being yuqinu, it becomes yuqinu. Yuqinu. Okay, he is certain. Alright, so we will end with some exercises. And as we do these exercises, I want you to be on the lookout for words that could potentially be verbs that begin with the letter waw or ya. So let's take a look at an example here. Inna nahnu narithu al-arda wa man 'alayha. So narithu is the present tense version of waritha. So you'll notice here it's the noon beginning. So that means we inherit. So indeed we inherit the earth and whoever is on it. Next one. وَسِعَ رَبِّي كُلَّ شَيْءٍ عِلْمًا. So wasi'a is your verb here. This is just the past tense form. And what does wasi'a mean? It means he encompassed. So my Lord encompassed all things in his knowledge. Okay. Or in knowledge. وَتَصِفُ أَلْسِنَتُهُمْ الْكَذِبَ. So أَلْسِنَتُهُم means their tongues. So أَلْسِنَة is the broken plural. أَلْسِنَتُهُم, their tongues. وَتَصِفُ, so تَصِفُ is the present tense version of وَصِفَ, which means, what does that mean? It actually means to describe or to attribute something. So what this is saying is that their tongues describe the lie or the falsehood. So their tongues describe the falsehood. So tasifa here is feminine, singular. So why are we using the feminine singular form when we're talking about tongues? It's because al-sina is a broken plural. And as we covered in our lesson, when we covered broken plurals, they are treated they're treated grammatically like a singular feminine. And that's why we're using tasifu. Alright, finally, لَن يَصِلُوا إِلَيْكَ. Yasilu is actually derived from yasiluna. So we have yasiluna, which means they arrive. They arrive. So right, wasila, he arrived. Yasilu, he arrives. Yasiluna, they arrive. But because we have lan at the beginning, the na drops. Right? So we have lan yasilu. What does that mean? They do not arrive, or they will not arrive. Ilayka, to you. They will not reach you. Alright, and we will end there. Here's a few more examples you can practice on your own. But that's it for today's lesson. Jazakallahu khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.